Hey, what's up, everybody? This is a very interesting episode, I think. I have two listener questions. The first one is from somebody who has found that when they go off their medication, at first they feel great, but then they feel pretty bad. And they're just wondering what the mechanism behind that is and what could be happening there. So we dig into the neurobiology of that. The second question is from somebody with ADHD who is having just the hardest time focusing, and it's getting them into trouble with school. So I give some practical tips and things that they can try to focus a bit better. So enjoy. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist and a self-help author from Southern California. My goal is to make mental health content for real people, just like you. And in this show, I answer your questions or dive deep into topics related to life, psychology, mental health, relationships, and more. Please be aware that sometimes I use some spicy language, and I also don't shy away from sensitive topics, but I will try to give you a content warning whenever it's relevant. So if all this sounds good to you, let's get started. All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. Thank you for joining me. This is episode 394. As a reminder, you can find the show notes at duffthepsych.com/episode 394. And hey, I wanted to let you guys know, those of you who listen on Apple Podcasts, they have added a new feature where there are full transcripts of every episode, both within your podcast app, as well as if you use the, desktop app. I think right now that's exclusively on Apple Podcasts. I'm not sure if there are other podcast players that do it. I'm going to try to see about getting those transcripts downloaded so that I can put them onto the blog post, but I haven't found a good way to do that yet. But if there is anybody who wants to go through and read along or go back and review, it's all in there, and that's automatically provided for every episode. So that's pretty awesome. Today, I am recording without headphones. Usually I have headphones plugged into my little audio interface to monitor as I'm going along, but I can't find them right now. And so I'm just kind of raw dogging it without headphones to monitor, and it feels horrible. I hate it. But hopefully everything goes smoothly despite not being able to actually hear myself talk. This is one of the little things that you don't realize that you take for granted until you can't find any damn headphones that are not, lightning plug or anything else. I just need a regular headphone jack, and I don't have any right now. But alas, the show must go on. I hope you're doing well. Let's go ahead and get into the first question. Here it goes. First question reads, "Hi, I was prescribed Cymbalta for panic disorder and had noticed I felt amazing on the days I forgot a dose. I told my doctor and we decided to taper me off. The first 3 days with no meds felt amazing, and the days after I felt like a zombie. Do you think there's any way to explain this?" So thank you. This is a great question. I appreciate you asking it. Let's just dive straight in. So first off, what is Cymbalta? Cymbalta is a medication also known as duloxetine, Duloxetine, duloxetine. And it's a medication that can be used to treat depression and anxiety. But it's an interesting one because it's also good for some pain applications. So things like peripheral neuropathy from diabetes, which is sort of like a numb, tingling pain that you get, or numbness or tingling. It can also be good for fibromyalgia and similar types of pain issues. And it's a little bit different from something like Lexapro or Prozac, which are SSRIs, in that it's an SNRI. So that means that it increases the activity of both serotonin and norepinephrine, which are both neurotransmitters in your brain. So this means that it can have a great impact if you haven't found a lot of success on SSRIs, or if you need that to sort of double dip into the pain territory. It's helpful because it doesn't just focus on serotonin, but it also has the, overlap with the norepinephrine. But for some people, that can also mean that it has more side effects. Not everybody, but it can be that case. So all that said, it's a totally common medication for depression, anxiety, and those other uses that I mentioned. So now what you're describing is an increase in energy and positive feelings immediately after missing your dose. That's pretty interesting. And I think I could know potentially what's going on here. At least I have a theory about it. And we're going to need to get into the weeds a little bit with sort of, psychology stuff, but stick with me. I think it's going to be really interesting. So there's an effect that I learned about back in college, and I'm surprised that more people don't actually know about it. I distinctly remember being in my class with Dr. Kissinger. He was my advisor in undergrad, and he talked about this effect, and it stuck with me. And ever since, throughout grad school and into my professional career, it's just not talked about very much. So basically, the way to think about it is, let me back up and say what the actual thing is. It's a phenomenon called conditioned compensatory response. Conditioned compensatory response, right? So a compensating response. You can certainly look further into it than I will get into here. There's a lot of research out there and great examples, but essentially your body is great at identifying patterns. Maybe you've heard the term conditioning before. There are different types, but the one we're talking about here is called classical conditioning. And this is the one that you learn about in all Psych 101 classes with Pavlov's dogs. So you take a natural response and you pair it with something else long enough that you can bring about that natural response without the original stimulus that caused it. So in the dog's experiment, right, dogs will salivate naturally when you present them with food or something that smells like food powder, whatever the case may be. So they're going to naturally start salivating. Happens with my dog all the time. It's disgusting. Well, what Pavlov did is he paired the presentation of that food with the sound of a bell or a tone, some sort of bell tone sound over and over again. Whenever you pair that food, or whenever you present that food, it's paired with that tone. And then eventually the dogs learn to associate that sound of the bell with food. And so if you rang that bell without providing any food, they would still salivate at the sound of the bell. And there are a lot of examples of classical conditioning in, everyday life, right? You're not born with a strong reaction, a strong body or emotional reaction to blue and red flashing lights while you're in the car. But as you grow up, maybe if you've been pulled over before, you learn to associate these colors with a cop. So, if you're driving and you see something, either it is a cop lights or it's something that looks like it, your heart might skip a beat. You might have a little bit of a rush of that kind of fight or flight response simply from seeing those colors in the rearview mirror. My dog, I talked about her a second ago, but she wasn't born knowing that she loved carrots from the grocery store, right? Or what the sound of a cutting board might be like. But now she's learned to associate the sound of chopping vegetables with potentially getting a carrot. So if she hears tuk, 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 chopping on the chopping board, she's going to come running because she thinks she might get something. So, those are some examples, and hopefully that helps you understand association a bit more. I think if you have pets or kids, you can probably imagine some scenarios, even for yourself, where classical conditioning has taken place, and that's that process of associating things. So when you take a medication or a drug of some kind, your body is taking in all of the cues around you and the context around you. So the location that you take it in, the time of day, the sights and sounds, the actual apparatus that you administer the substance with, right? It could be a pill, it could be injectable, it could be an auto-injector, anything like that. And your body will start to associate those cues with the substance itself. A crude but classic example is from shooting heroin or morphine. I'm not going to get graphic about this, but if that's a sensitive topic for you, you can skip forward a few seconds. But it's very interesting because when you shoot up, you might have, say, a kit with you with all of your gear. You might have a certain place that you tend to do it, which is away from other people or with certain people, right? You have certain consistencies to it, and your body will start to associate things like opening up your bag or unzipping it, digging in your drawer, or going to that location that you tend to shoot up with administration of the drug. Now, here's the part that really matters. Our bodies kind of don't like being fucked with, right? They like to keep a homeostasis, or as I call it, cosiostasis, right? They like to keep things nice and cozy, not too high, not too low. They try to return to a baseline and stay stable. So when we repeatedly give a substance to it that changes the way the body's working, it can learn to react in the opposite way in order to try to maintain that homeostasis. And this is one of the theories behind where tolerance to medications or substances comes from. Your body starts to work to reduce the impact of that substance. Therefore, it's suspected that sometimes overdoses happen with things like morphine or heroin because when someone takes a substance in a different location that than they normally do, with different cues, a different kit, whatever, their body isn't primed in the same way. So they get a higher dose, meaning they've been building a tolerance, so they have a higher dose, but their body doesn't do that compensatory response. So it's a higher dose without that compensation. So it hits a lot harder. This is a simplified perspective. There's many different factors at play, right? Association goes in both ways. There are other types of conditions that happen, but this is one of the potential mechanisms that I think could be at play here in this situation. So I'm going to talk about the specifics and get into how that might be playing out, but let's take a quick break and talk about our sponsor today. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Hey, how is your social battery right now? Mine has certainly been varying from week to week, and that's totally okay. I was recently feeling like I needed a lot more solo time to recharge, but right now I've been feeling pretty solitary, working so much, and I'm very, very much looking forward to getting some time with loved ones and getting out of the house a little bit this weekend. That's going to be really helpful. But it can be so easy to lose sight of our social batteries and just not take the necessary steps to recharge, which is why it's incredibly helpful to have some outside perspective to help you build that self-awareness. That's where therapy can come in, and if you've thought about giving therapy a shot, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online and designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and that will get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So head over to betterhelp.com/Duff today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Duff. All right, let's get back to it. So bringing this back to you, let's say that you've been on Simala for a while, and it's helpful because it reduces your overall anxiety, which is the major driver behind those panic attacks. Basically, it's helping you respond less and feel more mellow, right? You're going to have less of a sympathetic nervous system reaction. A common side effect of SNRIs is also drowsiness. So with all those together, your body might have learned to expect these effects from the medication, right? That dampening of things. So when you suddenly remove the medication, your body was still expecting it. So it made a compensatory response in the same sort of way, which would be to try to counteract the drowsiness, the subdued feeling, and those things that you've gotten from the Cymbalta. So you take the medication away, and that compensation makes you feel lifted up and higher energy. But a few days after, you may have started to feel the rebound effect. And this is actually at the neurotransmitter level. So your body has started producing less serotonin and norepinephrine in response to the medication. And that takes a while to level out. So I believe this is probably where if you started feeling brain zaps, those would be an indicator that the neurotransmitters are trying to level back out and they're not there yet. And that's kind of that rebound effect. In most cases, it's not dangerous. When I say brain zaps, if you haven't felt them, I have. And to me, it feels like almost like a heart palpitation, but in your brain, it's hard to explain it. You will know it when you feel it, a brain zap. It's kind of like a vibrating sort of thing that happens. And it's very uncomfortable, but not really dangerous. So, when you remove the medication, you might be producing less of those things, and then it has to rebound back. So it'll come back to a baseline, but this is why you usually gradually taper off of medications instead of just doing it cold turkey. Now, of course, we also for you need to consider why were you on the medication in the first place? Is the way that you're feeling, like a zombie, is that similar to how you felt prior to the introduction of this antidepressant medication? That's something to consider as well. Maybe you're just returning back to what things were like prior to the medication. Ultimately, it's a complex situation. If you feel like you've made strides in your mental health and your life, and that would allow you to be off medication, great, all the power to you. But it can take a little bit for your brain to come back to a baseline. We are always going to trend toward that homeostasis though, so you can get there. I would give it some time. I would focus on other methods of improving your well-being, like socializing, exercising, therapy, all that good stuff. And if it turns out that, in order to remain in a position where you can function in your life, you do need some medication, that's okay. You could always go back, and it doesn't have to be back to Cymbalta. It could be, or to alternatives. So I hope this information is helpful to you. I hope that right now you're doing well, and thank you for the really good question. All right, so on to question 2. It reads, "Hello, love the podcast, and I have a question. I was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult when I went back to school in my late 20s, and my psychiatrist offered me medication. I was so excited to try them and finally be able to focus. School has always been a struggle for me. Really, everything is a struggle, but I'm really struggling now pursuing higher education. So I tried 3 different medications, and they all put me to sleep. I ended up with 3 associate's degrees from bouncing focuses: early childhood education, social and behavior science, and psychology. Now I'm at a university pursuing social work. It's supposed to take me 2 years because I have my associates, but it'll be 4 years by the time I finish next spring. I got an extension on my paper because it's taking me 2 months to get over being sick, and I'm still so tired. I've kept her up to date on my health, I think meaning the professor. I've already done 1.5 out of 4 pages, but it wasn't done. I sat down 3 hours ago to finish it and turn it in, but then I watched videos on my phone, looked at pictures of my nephew as a baby. Even now, I need to work on my paper, and I'm emailing you a question. It's a writing-intensive requirement, so the final is a 10-page paper. In the future, what can I do to help me focus? Thank you for the question. It's a great one. And, I'm glad to hear that you eventually got a diagnosis of ADHD, even though it took you until your late 20s. I'm sure looking back, you can probably see a lot of ways that ADHD probably impacted you as a child and as a teen. So that must have been really validating to get that. And, you got some medication with the hope that it would help you focus more effectively, which would then allow you to pursue some of these higher education goals. But right now you're still struggling with symptoms and they're getting in the way of you progressing efficiently. I have done some episodes on ADHD in the past, so I'm not going to go deep into what everything means and all the terminology. If you just go to deafthepsych.com and put ADHD in the search bar, there's a few episodes that'll pop up that you could review. But one thing to remember about ADHD is that it doesn't mean you have no capacity for attention. It means that you're lacking control of your attention. Right? In other words, you may have, I kind of think of it like a flashlight. Your flashlight of attention may have a very strong beam of light, but, you can't point it exactly where you want it to. So sometimes you may pay too much attention, but it doesn't point at the thing you're asking it to. It, goes to this other thing that you probably shouldn't be focusing on. You can focus on the right thing sometimes, but it's just not reliable and it's a challenge for you. The example that you provided in your question is really perfect, right? You have an important paper that you've already gotten an extension on, but you find yourself doing just about everything other than writing that paper. And you said 3 hours later. So this is a real struggle for you. And I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry it's been such a struggle. Before I hop in and try to give you some advice about this, I do want to take a moment to recognize all that you've accomplished. One thing that people who are not familiar with various neurodivergent individuals is that it takes more effort to do the same thing. So all of your associate's degrees, everything else that you've accomplished in your life, these were hard won, and you deserve some recognition for that because it's not easy. So all that praise aside, what can we do here? First off, if you have not yet worked with a therapist that focuses on ADHD or an executive functioning coach, those could be really great ideas. That term executive functioning, maybe you've heard that before, but it's an issue that a lot of people with ADHD have. Executive functions are higher level thinking skills. So things like mental flexibility, right? Being able to alternate between tasks and be flexible without getting stuck or off track. Also things like planning and organization, impulse control, right? Not impulsively responding to things, being able to filter out distractions, all of that good stuff. So having somebody who is there to look at your specific life and they can tailor an approach that works for you is definitely going to be the biggest bang for your buck. But there are a variety of things that you can do, for yourself to set yourself up for success with or without a professional. First off, it sounds like you may really need to work on your environment that you're trying to do work in. When you wrote in that question and I read through it, the first thing that you said that really stuck out to me was that you started working on your paper, but then you began messing around on your phone. And in my mind, the first question was, why the hell is your phone near you, right? You know that you have a tendency to do that. So that thing doesn't need to be right next to you. So your first task is to start paying attention to what gets you off track. Is it notifications from your phone? Is it people in your environment? Is it something in the environment itself physically? And then when you get some awareness of that, maybe write down a little note or something, maybe keep a stack of Post-its or a notepad next to you while you're working. And when you notice that you're distracted, write down what distracted you. But after you come to realize what those things are, you can work on adjusting them whenever possible. Personally, I don't have ADHD, although it was thought that I might have had it as a child. They wanted me to be tested for it. We never did. And, even if I did have it, I was able to work my way through and, certainly grew out of the primary symptoms. But I do, still struggle with focus sometimes. And I'd make a lot of active effort to help me focus. So from the outside, I am quite productive and I do many different things, but it does take a lot of effort and strategies on my part. So I have some examples personally, one of which is that if I absolutely need to get some important work done, right? Like if I'm like, okay, I need to finish this podcast outline because I need to record in an hour and this has to get done, I will tell the important people in my life that, hey, I'm locking in for a bit. Okay, so I'm going to disappear. I need to lock down and get this done. And then I'll use a custom do not disturb setting on my phone. I think it's just right on the focus part on my iPhone. Yeah, it says work. And so when I put that on, it makes the screen basically blank, basically black. It doesn't have any notifications that pop up, and it makes it so that people can't call me unless it's like an emergency. So it's not distracting. And that's good enough for me. But for other people, maybe you actually have to get it out of the room or out of reach at least, or something like that. There are also many tools that you can use that help you focus on the phone or on the computer, things that block certain websites, things that are writing tools with, they block out the screen and just have you focus on the writing. Just be careful to avoid the pitfall of, fake productivity, right? Searching for the perfect tool for hours and hours instead of actually using it to get shit done, right? That's definitely a pitfall that can happen with ADHD as well. A lot of cases, a change of scenery is going to be helpful. So going to a place that you have less associations to, right? Home or wherever you spend most of your time, that is going to have associations with, entertainment, socializing, rest, all sorts of things like that. But going to, say, a coffee shop or a library for a designated hour or two to just work on one thing, that sometimes can yield much better results than just trying to power through it at home and fighting against those distractions that are there. For many people with ADHD, I find that they mix up what they gravitate toward and what they enjoy versus what is helpful for them. And by this, I mean, they might say that they can only focus with music or only focus and get work done while multitasking or any number of things. But if you actually look at their behavior and how their productivity plays out, that's kind of just the narrative that they have for themselves. And I think the best way to learn what actually works for you is trial and error and paying attention to it, right? And what works for you may change over time. It is true that some people with ADHD require some stimulation to help them focus. The way that I explain this is that, without any sort of outside stimulation, your brain can find itself sort of in search mode, right? So again, that flashlight, imagine you're in a dark room and you're looking around for something to, lock your attention on. So it's scrambling for something to latch onto. And obviously, it would be best if that could latch on to the thing you're supposed to focus on, but that's not how ADHD works, right? It's hard for you to control. So some stimulation might be helpful to help your brain chill out and stop searching around so much for something to focus on. As I said, this changes over time, but right now, my secret ultimate weapon, if I need to focus, right, if I'm doing a lock-in and I just need to get some shit done, is to turn on, there's a very specific, channel or type of video on YouTube. It's dark classic academia. So it's like classical music, and it usually has rain playing in the background. So, dark classical piano music with rain in the background. And then I will also layer on top of that like an ASMR video, and I have both those playing simultaneously. So for me, that's relaxing. It definitely blocks out external sounds because there's just so much different, kind of micro sounds going on that things don't really come through as much. And it gives my brain just enough to be satisfied without pulling my attention away from my work, right? If I had my phone right here and it was right next to me, for those of you who can't see, and it was playing, a YouTube video with the news or with some commentary, that's really going to be harder to, pull my attention away from to work. And that's competing. This other stuff is just the background, and that satisfies my brain enough to not search for any other distractors. So, I would avoid things like movies, shows, as I said, YouTube videos with commentary, or even music with lyrics a lot of times, because that's likely to compete for mental real estate with the work that you're trying to do. You may find that you do well with the Pomodoro Technique, which is basically where you set a work interval, so a time interval, and a rest interval. I think the classic is 25 minutes of work to 5 or 10 minutes of rest, but you can do whatever you want. Within my reach right now, right next to my monitor, I have kind of a just old school visual timer, and I got this on Amazon for really cheap. I just twist it to the right time, so 10, 20 minutes, whatever it might be. And that can be helpful for some people, so you can do kind of short bursts of nice focused work, and then give yourself a little bit of a rest. And for me, usually I'll spend this rest period playing like a video game on my computer, something that can easily be picked up and put down, not like an intensive game where I'm going to get stuck in like a 30-minute match or something of that sort. Nothing that's going to really draw me in, but something I can kind of just go to and, play a few rounds or, play and pause, that kind of thing. Again, though, trial and error. Try to figure out what works for you. Another tool that is potentially very, very helpful, but it can be a little bit tough at first, is mindfulness. It's been shown through the research that mindfulness practice is extremely beneficial for people with ADHD. And when I say mindfulness, I'm discussing it in the sort of nuts and bolts sense. I guess you could say sort of the westernized sense, not necessarily the Buddhist mindfulness practice, although that's great as well. But I mean intentionally practicing your attentional control, right? So paying attention to where you are, paying attention and spending prolonged periods trying to be less driven by distractions, either internal or external, and spend more time being driven by experiencing the present moment. I've talked ad nauseum about mindfulness on the podcast and elsewhere, but there's a lot of great exercises for it. But essentially what you want to do is practice shifting your attention when you get off track back to what you're trying to focus on. And so a lot of times that's focusing on your breath or something of that sort. Again, it can be uncomfortable. It can make you feel a little squirmy, but it's a practice, right? You do this every day for a few weeks. You're going to get better at it, and the benefits will cross over into other parts of your life. So that definitely is another one. The way I think of it is it's like essentially doing physical therapy for a weak muscle group, but just with your brain, right? Your brain is not very good at doing that sort of set shifting between different things. So you want to flex that muscle and work on it. Another thing that you can do, and this is something that, sometimes people need to do, is set yourself up for success by establishing more accountability. For example, finding a study buddy that can give you some social pressure to focus on what you're working on rather than being distracted. Or using a website, like there's one called FocusMate, where you can find somebody that you pair with online. They're working on their own thing, you're working on your own thing, and you sort of start off with a call to say what you're going to work on, and then you end with a call saying what you were able to do during that time. So again, just a little bit of accountability, a little bit of social pressure. I think, a co-working space would have a similar function to some people. If you find that your organization is lacking, and I mean this in the practical sense, not the I have thousands of pretty journals with nothing in them sense, then that's also something to focus on. On the days where your mind is especially wily and not wanting to focus, you might need to put an hour by hour schedule into your calendar. Or maybe you need somebody to help you establish a physical organizational system for your papers or digitally. If you end up wasting a lot of time looking for things, if you're distracted by piles of things in your workplace, basically just try to figure out, again, what is getting you into trouble and work on that a bit. Of course, things like increased structure to your days and your weeks, better nutrition, sleep, exercise, yada, yada, all that stuff is lovely and helpful here too. And then lastly, if you feel like ADHD medication hasn't done the trick for you, but you still really want something to help you out like that, I would just continue working on it with your doctor. There are many different approaches. Even though you've tried a few, it doesn't sound like you've exhausted all of the possibilities yet. So you can keep trying and finding a good balance for you. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm about to sign off for this episode, but before I do that, make sure as soon as we are done with this episode that you take a moment before doing something else, right? Take a moment after stopping to breathe and consider what your next action is going to be. Don't just pull out your phone and start scrolling. Don't aimlessly walk into another room. Think first, make sure you have a plan, and then move. Thank you very much, guys. See you for the next one. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. If you would like to send a question or a topic for a future episode, please email me at duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you like my approach and would like to learn more about my books, online course, or other resources, please head over to my website at duffthepsych.com. And lastly, it would mean so much to me if you would leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to it, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, you got this.